It's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
We have a few topics that I want to touch on today. Number one, going to be on LeBron's injury. Now the Lakers, both of their stars are going to be injured and missing an extended period of time. So how are they really going to come back? Which team really has the most pressure to capitalize with the Lakers stars being injured? And who even on the Lakers has the most pressure on them to maintain this to maintain their place in the Western Conference standings? Also, we'll talk about the Jets offseason, what they may do in terms of the draft pick, and then to wrap up the NCAA tournament. And Charlie Baldy is joining us right now. Chuck, what's going on, man?
Not much. My bracket is buried, thrown away, lit on fire. I don't even want to talk about it, to be honest.
Well, on that note, we'll start with the NCAA tournament. So we're through two rounds of the tournament right now, through the round of 64, the round of 32. I picked Illinois to win. That didn't age too well. I had Ohio State in the Final Four. That didn't age too well. So what do you want to? So in terms of that, talk about like the upsets and what you really saw. Like, what's your biggest takeaway in terms of the tournament so far?
I think Loyola Chicago, who was the Cinderella story back in 2019, they were underseeded by the committee. I mean, they're much better than an 8 seed, and we've seen that through 2 games so far. And I mean, I had Illinois in the championship game also. You also look at Oral Roberts, another team that went out, they beat Ohio State, then they came back and they beat Florida. Now they're in the Sweet 16. I think I said it with you when you had me and Coach Mack on to preview the bracket, was that there were going to be a lot of upsets in this tournament. Now, I didn't think Illinois would be the first 1 seed to get beaten, but that just goes to show how high-paced teams are faring much better in this tournament. We see it with Arkansas, a fast-paced team, Alabama, a fast-paced team. Kansas got beat yesterday by USC. They're kind of a high-paced team also. So I think we're seeing how up-tempo styles are killing teams because they don't know how to play a full-court game. Whereas when compared to other years, it used to be teams that used to play the full-court games had trouble adjusting to the half-court offenses, but now it's the other way around. Look at Syracuse, for example, and Coach Mack said it perfectly also. Teams are going to struggle with the 2-3 zone, and we've seen it so far. The problem I had with Syracuse, though, was that I didn't think they were going to be able to score too much, but Buddy Boeheim has gone off. I think he scored 29 and 35 or something like that in his first 2 games. So when you look at these teams, it's just coaching is becoming what's the word I'm looking for? Coaching is becoming something that every team needs, and they're relying on it to make adjustments. And if these teams don't make adjustments, we're going to keep seeing more upsets. You got to know how to stop primary guys. There are a lot of teams, like I just said, still left that run, full court offenses. I like to push the pace, grab the rebound. They're out on the break. Teams got to learn, and coaches got to learn how to slow that down. And last night when Florida State played Colorado could not solve Florida State defensively. They only had 20 points at the end of the first half after scoring, a ton. I think they scored maybe 90 on Georgetown the game before. It goes to show that coaching matters, especially this year.
Right, for sure. So people who know me, I specialize in NBA and NFL. College basketball is not usually my forte, but my takeaway from here is it shows just the difference between college and the NBA. I always try to look at, like, putting a bracket together, looking at the tournament, where there's a difference why a guy goes to a Loyola Chicago or Oral Roberts versus a Florida State versus a Gonzaga or Illinois. There's a reason why. It's like these dudes are more grown men, and there's guys who are going to these lower tier D1 schools who aren't as polished and who aren't that, like, they're not NBA, their ceiling isn't making it to the NBA, getting drafted, or they're just not as polished and skilled as a Florida State or an Illinois or a Ohio State, one of these big-time schools. So the thing here is I tried to compare it to the NBA, where it's like the Warriors are a perfect example. The best team in the NBA when they had Kevin Durant, even before the Kevin Durant Warriors, when they were winning 73 games, this and that, you were able to see teams go neck to neck with them for an extended period of time. You would be able to see they goes a first half going shot for shot, bucket to bucket with them. It's like, oh, the Warriors may lose this game. Oh, they actually can get beaten. But the teams who are inferior to the Warriors can only sustain that pace of play for so long. And then it's eventually, as time goes on, the Warriors are going to show you why they're the best team. And then in the third quarter or the fourth quarter, they're going to break you. They're going to shoot the lights out. I tried to look at that as these top seeds, these top 1 or 2 seeds, and realize, like, the Oral Roberts isn't going to win. Like, teams like Ohio State, they can't lose. They just have too much firepower. Like, whether they struggle in the first half or even the beginning of the second half, at some point the talent is going to show for it. But it just shows it's a different style of game where college guys are still going to make mistakes. They're still not those NBA guys who can turn on a switch. It really goes to show why people like college basketball so much better. Not only because of the defense and how much harder they play, but it's just they're not polished. They're just not NBA caliber players where the pros, it's when a team's more superior, I mean, they're going to win 9 out of 10 times. And college basketball, I mean, it is literally a coin flip. But in terms of my bracket between having Ohio State and Illinois in the Final Four and Illinois winning, I mean, that's all she wrote from there. But what do you think about Oral Roberts? Do they have any fighter's chance to make it to this Elite Eight or even the Final Four? And what about any other like seeds who aren't like necessarily a favorite to get to the Final Four? Like, will you give a UCLA any shot to beat Alabama? Is Gonzaga, are they on the ropes, or do they have anything to worry about? What do you think about teams like that?
I'm glad you brought up about players being polished, because I think we're seeing it with the stars of the tournament who got sent home early. Yes, they are very talented players, phenomenal games, but because they're not polished, they don't know like when to, take over a game, so to say, or when to take their shot. Like, I forgot what play it was, and he only had like 2 shots by halftime, and he's one of the team's better players. I'm just saying to myself, why is the coach not getting his offense, through this guy? And with Texas Tech, they had a chance to beat Arkansas late in the game, but Chris Beard never called timeout, and his offense was all over the place on their final possession. I think coaches are struggling with when to, so to say, change what they've done throughout the whole season. Like, you want to stick to your game plan, but when is it time to kind of like throw it away and basically play to your opponent, which is something that doesn't always work, but you might have to at certain points. I think a team that could definitely, make a little bit of noise is UCLA. I'm glad you brought them up. I think they finally found their groove. And we got to remember, teams this year, because of COVID, between pauses, having games canceled and everything, didn't really get the necessary amount of games that they usually play through a year. Like there were a lot of conferences that didn't play out of, conference games. So for teams earlier on in the year, end of October, early November, the Dukes and Kentuckys of the world are playing, the mid-major teams and blowing them out by 50. But that helps get your team, going and into a groove. And we didn't have that this year. So now's the point where teams are now playing the same amount of games that they would have played towards the end of the regular season last year and years prior. So I think that's key with UCLA, because now guys are back. You got guys like John Juzang, Tiger Campbell. Those guys are now finally, realizing like what they have to do on offense, and they're taking the game over. And I think we're seeing teams that have dealt with injuries, Baylor, Villanova, I think UCLA even dealt with injuries. Now that they're having more practice time, now they're learning how to win and how to play the game without that player not being there. So with that said, I like UCLA. I don't know if they could they're playing Alabama, right? So it's going to be a tough game. I think Alabama is great. Nate Oates is a good coach. But when you look at UCLA, they also have a great coach in Mick Cronin, who did very well back at Cincinnati. Syracuse is another team. Houston, they have a couple of days to prepare for the 2-3 zone, but is that enough time for Kelvin Sampson to get his guys ready for the zone? And Houston plays a very tough and physical game. So it's going to be key to see if Syracuse is able to keep up with the physicality and strength of Houston. And I think Loyola has to be the pick by many. That whole region now, Illinois lost, West Virginia lost, Purdue got upset early on. So I think teams in that region, I think Loyola is the team to beat in that region possibly. So, and for Oral Roberts, they had a good run. Listen, they have great players and Abmis and who else? I forgot their other player who have been stars so far through the games and helped them with the upset. But I don't think they're athletic enough, and I don't think they have enough depth to compete with the other teams left in the tournament.
Regardless of the year, we see upset after upset in this tournament, and that's why we call it March Madness, because it's a one-game elimination. You don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the upsets make it so exciting. Do you think the home court advantage, do you think them not getting a full season is leading to even more upsets than we're accustomed to seeing? Because if you're going to ask me from my raw knowledge, I mean, there's been more upsets than I could remember, at least. Like this bracket is way more unexpected than we've had in years past. I mean, in 2019, I finished the first day perfect. Then after that, it was a disaster. But I did go a day perfect. But in terms of this year, does that really affect the outcomes? We have no home court, and they just haven't played a full season in terms of more upsets?
Yes, I think home court does play an advantage because, teams are so used to having their fans there, especially the student sections, they're always loud and whatnot. But I look at it more towards talent is more evenly distributed among teams. Like we don't have Kentucky, the Kentuckys of the world, the Dukes of the world, the real blue bloods who every year have stacked teams. They're filled with 3-4 lottery picks and they're the favorite above all else. I mean, Gonzaga and Baylor are probably the 2-1 seeds that are the favorites to meet up in the championship. But there's a lot of good teams, still left that have talented players. And I think we're seeing more towards the transfer portal with the NCAA than ever before. More star players are entering it. Like North Carolina, they just had a highly touted big man, Kessler, just go into the transfer portal. He's leaving North Carolina. I think he's going to go over to Gonzaga. So I think we're going to see teams, and don't forget, this is also a season where I believe seniors have the chance to come back next year and play again. So that's going to lead to even more, talent left over on rosters and maybe, teams that might not get enough playing time with a blue blood go to a mid-major and like what that program is building up. Or maybe a senior on a mid-major team is like, hey, I want to finish out my career and go win a ring. So they might go to, one of the dominant teams like Gonzaga, Baylor, Illinois, Michigan, etc. So I think yes, home court is definitely playing a role in this. I think teams they can't really do much in the bubble in Indy. They're just, hanging out with each other. Most of the time they're in their hotel rooms. When VCU had the positive COVID test, then the question became, is the NCAA going to be more, strict with their protocols? Are teams just going to, have to just stay in hotel rooms for the rest of the tournament and not be able to, go out and about throughout the city? But, I mean, there's still fans and families, in the arenas, and you can hear them. It's nice to hear, fans chanting, defense. When Mac McClung was at the line for free throws, his first couple of free throw attempts, the Arkansas fans started chanting overrated. I miss that. I miss hearing the fans, get at the players and chant against them. That's great. That's great for the sport. It brings, a joy that, these teams are crazy and they're so into it. But I mean, if you're not able to win on the road, you're never going to win a national championship. So that's where I think the home team narrative kind of, goes away, because if you're going to go, because think about it, nobody plays in their home arena in college basketball during the postseason. So, I mean, I guess in a way, yes, but in a way, no, because this happens every year. So you have to know how to go out on the road and win games.
Before we move on, what's your new Final Four given this new Sweet 16?
I'm so mad at myself because 3 of my Final Four teams are still alive. And the one team that missed, Illinois, I didn't originally have in my Final Four. I had Houston over them, and Houston is still alive, and they might very well get to the Final Four. So I'm going to stick with my original 3. I'm going to put Houston in it, And I'm going to go with my original championship game of Gonzaga-Baylor, with Gonzaga beating Baylor. The only reason why I went with Illinois is because I saw them in the Big Ten tournament. They went on, they won. I didn't think anybody was going to stop, the Sumo, Colburn, Frazier, who else? Curbelo, but Loyola Chicago found a way. And credit to their coach for knowing to take away the outside and just let Colburn beat you, which he had a very good game, but because Illinois couldn't get the three ball going, and I think Frazier shot maybe like 1 of 7, maybe even worse from the field, that's why Illinois ended up losing the game.
So moving topics, I want to talk about the NFL a little bit. The New York Jets. The Jets have had a quietly decent offseason, and then there's still the rumors about what they're going to do with that number 2 pick, what they're going to do with Sam Darnold. Is it in the Jets' best interest to try to trade Sam Darnold and go for a Justin Fields who had an awesome year? Or do they try to build around him and draft a Devonta Smith and then get him a real weapon? We know they got Corey Davis in the offseason. So as a fellow Jets fan, what's the best move for the Jets?
Listen, I mean, I've been toying with this idea since they lost out on the Trevor sweepstakes. When it comes down to it, you can make a case for both going with Sam or even going with Fields or Wilson. I mean, in a way, I don't think it matters to me because I'm a fan of Fields. I'm a fan of Wilson. I'm even a fan of Trey Lance, who's probably going to be the 4th quarterback taken. I'm also a fan of Sam being, a USC fan. I think Joe Douglas holds all the cards right now. Unfortunately, the Deshaun Watson situation with all the allegations is putting a hamper on things at the moment. So I don't know if they're going to still, be in play for that leading up to the draft because the draft's only in a month. So it's going to be wild to see what happens with that. I don't think they should go after Russell Wilson. But then you got to think about it. What are teams, desperate teams going to give you for number 2? Like, there's been a lot of talk about Carolina at 8, wanting to move up, right? So let's say, for example, Carolina moves up, right? They got to at least give up 2 1s, maybe 2 2s, and a 3 to go from 8 to 2, because that's a big jump, right? So then if that happens, the Jets have 3 firsts next year. Like, that's wild. And then if you keep Sam in that situation, then you have 3 more ones to build around them with. But then the other, case that you can make is, Sam hasn't played well, whether, you want to blame Adam Gase or not. But what happens if you do trade back, you roll with Sam, Sam doesn't progress, he continues to, regress, and then Fields and Wilson and everyone, go on and they become, like legitimate, starting QBs in the NFL, then, it's like duh. So I think I don't want to be Joe Douglas right now because the rest of his, tenure depends on what he does in a month. Personally, I think best case scenario, and I know it probably won't happen at all, is if they trade Sam and trade out on number 2. Now, I know you always want to stay where you are and get your guy, but I like Fields, I like Wilson, I like Lance. If the Jets can somehow trade out of 2 and trade back and still wind up with one of those 3 guys, I think that's a home run without a doubt. I mean, you look at Atlanta possibly moving up. I don't think the Eagles or the Bengals are going to move up because they already have their quarterbacks. And then you have Carolina who's going to look to move up. So if they could trade back and still get one of those quarterbacks, I think that's the home run. But I think that's the longest shot of them all. I think essentially they're going to – Joe Douglas likes to build through the draft. So it all depends on what LaFleur wants to do. If LaFleur thinks Darnold's his guy, they're going to roll with Darnold. If LaFleur likes Wilson, Fields, or Lance, they're going to go with one of those 3 guys and take them. So it depends on what the masterminds of the Jets want to do with it.
I think the Jets are going to try to keep Darnold, and they're going to try to build around. I think they're going to try to target Devonta Smith, which is not the worst thing in the world. I think Sam Darnold coming out of college, people said, oh, he's the next Joe Namath. He's so talented. The Jets finally got their guy. The moment he was drafted, did nothing in a Jets uniform. All he did was put up the cap and hold up the jersey with number 1 in it. They thought this is the next Joe Namath. The Jets finally got their guy, even though he's proved nothing. I think he's a very talented quarterback. I think his ceiling was very high. I think his ceiling was the highest out of all 5 first-round quarterbacks in the 2018 draft. And just because your ceiling is the highest doesn't mean you ever reach it, which Darnold clearly did not reach it. The problem with this is he had no quarterback to develop him, which we know that, and he had absolutely nothing around him. I mean, the offensive line was in the toilet bowl. The running game was just as bad, and the receivers have been a disaster between the injuries and simply just having no receivers. So given all 3 of those things, he was set up to failure. And any quarterback in the history of the NFL and years to come, if you are set up to fail, you will fail 100 out of 100 times, and that's why Darnold failed. I'm just at the point where I think the Jets franchise as a whole ruined him. I understand a new coaching staff is coming in, new general manager after Joe Douglas is his second year now. Given all that, it is looking like a new system and a new environment, but in reality, it's not. I think in Darnold's best interest, it's to play for another organization because he's never going to be successful here. I think you could airdrop him in many other teams who are more ready-made, and he will be a top 10 quarterback or a top 15 quarterback, to say the least. I think you could put him at the New Orleans Saints, give him a healthy Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara in the backfield, Sean Payton as his coach. That dude's going to be a top 15 quarterback. I think you could put that in the bank. You put him in New England, I think Bill Belichick would figure out a way to make him successful. That's where I'm at with Darnold, but I think because of their draft capital, because of their cap space, keeping him and building around him is their best option. I think there's a lot of risk to it, but in terms of a team, so you don't have to trade him, trade your number 2, and then get a Deshaun Watson, and then or even a Russell Wilson, even though they're 2 top 5 quarterbacks, which as a Jets fan, that'd be the greatest quarterback in their history. As awesome as that would be, that would just that team would be way more inferior given how much draft capital they would have to get rid of, how much more less cap space they would have. And then those guys would be out any weapons. Sure, Deshaun Watson had an amazing year. I think he threw 43 touchdowns for 7 interceptions, about 4,800 yards, if I'm not mistaken. But the Texans still went 4-12. If you don't have a good team around you, you're never going to be successful. Which the Jets can get that top 5 quarterback, but I really don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. So I think, even though this is going to take a lot of risk, they may be better off keeping Darnold and trying their best to really get him pieces. A new coach, maybe that he could be developed. I don't know if it's too late. Only time will tell then. But I think them trying to try it out with him, having pieces around him, is your best bet if it's not too late to develop him. Because the kid's only 23. He's only 23 years old. So to say that he reached his ceiling, that he can never reach it, may be too early. I just don't know if it's with the Jets franchise right now. So with that being said, in terms of their number 2 pick, I think Devonta Smith is a great option. If they can draft back to a team that's going to take a quarterback, but they know they could still get their hands on Devonta Smith, I think that would be the true home run. Because they got to get, Darnold needs a real number 1. Not a Quincy Enunwa who's hurt every year. Not a Robbie Anderson who just has a lights-out go route. A true number 1. And what Devonta Smith proved at Alabama, what he did all year last year, was simply special. Like, you know out of the draft, like, this dude's going to be a superstar in this league. So you knew out of college CeeDee Lamb was going to be that type of talent. And I think Devonta Smith is going to be that type of guy.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, if they do run it back with Sam, and like you said, he's only 23. He's younger than Joe Burrow, who, was the number 1 pick last year. So definitely the window is still open for Sam but, and this is a big but, you don't know if he regressed because of himself or because of Adam Gase. And I think it's a little bit of both. You could see the problems with Sam. And don't forget, the offense that Adam Gase ran, it was pathetic. NFL offense is now all about fast-paced motion offenses. And it just, Adam Gase doesn't run that. So that's where the struggles come in. So I really want to see Sam in a LaFleur offense. And if they could trade back and, they surround him with a Smith or even like a Kyle Pitts, I think that's a home run within itself. And then you also setting yourself up for next year. So let's say Sam, has a decent year. Then, like I said before, then you have 3 wins next year and possibly even more. If Sam's the guy, then and you're picking at the top of the draft again, then you could trade back because you don't need a quarterback. So then you could trade again to, a quarterback hungry team. But I mean, the Jets have so many holes. So it's going to be a while before they're what we want them to be as fans. But I don't have a problem with whatever Joe Douglas decides to do because, like I said, I like the 3 quarterbacks in the draft, and I like Sam. So whatever the plan is a plan. And like you said, they had a quietly good offseason so far. They didn't go out and spend the big bucks like Mike McCadden used to do, overpay for a bunch of players at positions that don't get paid. And they brought in Carl Lawson, who's going to be a nice edge rusher for them. Corey Davis, who's a phenomenal, wide receiver on the outside, almost like Mims, where, they're hard-nosed players. They could run block, and they're not limited to, a slot guy. And I think they just got to keep on building it up. I like how they haven't touched the running backs yet because they don't even need that's not what the NFL is. You don't need, high quality running backs, and they're going to build up the line. Everybody's complaining that they haven't signed offensive line help and everything, but they don't realize that this draft is filled with interior offensive linemen, which are guards and centers. For those of you who don't know, you might be able to get, a starting caliber guard or center in the 3rd and 4th rounds. That's how deep it is. So I think Joe Douglas has a plan. That's why he hasn't gone crazy. Even at cornerback, they need another outside cornerback. They're probably going to play Austin in the slot, Hall on the outside, and then they need a true number 1. I think that's why they haven't gone out and signed a cornerback yet, because they're hoping that one of them falls to them at 23. A J.C. Horn, maybe a Asante Samuel Jr., has a good pro day and whatnot, and he moves up his stock. Or Caleb Farley, who is undergoing back surgery, I believe, so he's going to drop a little bit. So it's going to be very interesting what Joe Douglas does, not only with number 2, but with number 23 as well.
If you look at it, getting Devontae Smith in this draft and the Jets receivers are healthy, their receiving core is going to be pretty decent. Is it going to be great? No. Good? I think it's going to be pretty decent. Devontae Smith, Denzel Mims quietly had a good year when he was there. You're never going to notice it because the Jets were so bad, but when he was there, he quietly was pretty solid, to say the least, in his rookie year. I think health is going to be a big one. Jameson Crowder is not, he was the number 1 wide receiver. He's far from a number 1. You want to stick with the number 3? Sure. He's a number 3. He's a number 4. He's not a number 2, and he's certainly not a number 1, which is why what he was this year. So if he's really your true number 3 or number 4 with a Corey Davis and Devontae Smith on the outside, and then Denzel Mims, I think they have a decent receiving core. Chris Herndon, again, he's shown talent. A 4th-round pick out of Miami, he's in and out of trouble, in and out of the lineup due to injury. That's another weapon for Darnold that he would have. So the best thing for the Jets is to keep him and hope that he still has room to go, that he could get a coach that can develop him. Because he still makes the same mistakes he did in college. Out of college, he was just a guy who can sling the ball down the field, was a little bit of a gunslinger. But he did was the high turnovers. He had bad pocket awareness, fumbled a ton, had a ton of interceptions. So if you could minimize those being developed with a good coach, then I think Darnold has potential in this league. But yeah, I think the best option for the Jets as a team is to keep him. Again, it would be the sexy thing to get a Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson, which I just can't imagine the Jets having that big of a star at quarterback. I feel like it's just too unrealistic. And either way, the team would have to thin down so much. So I'm not, as much as I'd love it, if they could keep all their capital, their cap space and their draft capital and players, and then acquire them, of course, it's a home run. But I just don't think that's clearly in their best interest. I just don't think they have enough to really be competitive, or if they really want to turn this franchise around. I guess another way to look at it is look at Darnold, that he's still 23, which is Baker Mayfield's 23 coming out of college. Other guys are 22 coming out of college. So, I mean, if you look at him being that young, I mean, you still can say, like, okay, I think we have time to develop him, which I think that's going to be Joe Douglas's plan, if you're going to ask me.
Yeah, and when you look at Baker Mayfield especially, he wasn't that good. Like the fan base was calling for his head after, a couple of seasons. But what did they do? They brought in a coach who designed an offense around him to play to his best abilities. You're not going to win many games with Baker Mayfield throwing, 40 times a game. But you established that run game with Chubb and Hunt. They beefed up their offensive line. And now, look, Baker Mayfield had a pretty, decent year, and the Browns went to the playoffs, which is kind of like what the Jets could do if they stick with Sam. Sam is best when he's on the move. He's not going to, stand up in the pocket and, start firing downfield and, killing teams that way. We've seen it, how many times where Sam rolls out of his pocket and he makes these, unbelievable throws downfield into these tight windows, and you just like, wow, this is why this guy was getting, so much hype coming out of college. So I think that's what they got to do. Listen, it's another deep receiver class too. So even if they don't, go receiver in the first round, they have another early pick in the second round. So they could wait and hold off on that and then get a receiver. There's a lot of good receivers, and that's what you're going to need. You need to put weapons around this kid. He's not going to do good throwing the ball downfield to Brashard Perryman. Crowder's on the last year of his deal, and they were in, trying to get Juju. Imagine upgrading in the slot from Juju to Crowder. That would have been fantastic for them. But listen, they have a plan. I don't know what they're going to do. If they roll with Sam, listen, I'm here for it. If they decide to move on from him, get another pick back, which is only going to help them more because they have so many holes, then I'm fine with it. I mean, I think it feels good to know that there's somebody in charge, unlike a John Idzik or Mike McCagnon, who's going to be bad at drafting and then have to, try to overcompensate for his mistakes through free agency and start bringing in guys that aren't worth the money. And think about it, they're also getting C.J. Mosley back next year. Fingers crossed. That's going to be a big addition to the middle of their defense. Then they'll have their quarterback on defense to go along with the other guys.
So in terms of NFL, that's going to wrap up today. But one more thing, I want to talk about the NBA real quick. I mean, every single star, it looks like they're going down right now. And the biggest star in the game, that's LeBron James. LeBron James suffers a high ankle sprain in Saturday night's loss. Will be out indefinitely 3 to 4 weeks. So now the Lakers, both of their stars are out for an extended period of time. Moving forward, who's under the most pressure with those two guys out? Maybe whether it's on the Lakers or just another team to capitalize. But anything LeBron does, it changes the dynamic of the NBA. Whether he's winning, whether he's losing, whether he's playing, whether he's not, everything revolves around him. So who, in terms of a team or a player, no matter what team it's on, is under the most pressure given he's not there, and now Anthony Davis isn't there, and now we don't know where the Lakers are going to stand in the Western Conference playoffs. Right now they stand at the number 4 seed, 4 games back behind the Utah Jazz, the Clippers, and the Phoenix Suns. So in terms of that, how does this change the dynamic of the NBA? Who's under the most pressure?
Normally, I would say the Lakers, but I'm not because they won their championship last year. LeBron was brought to LA to win a ring, and that's what he delivered. Now, I don't know if Anthony Davis is going to come back. I mean, when you're dealing with the Achilles, when we saw with Kevin Durant a couple of years ago, those are tough injuries to, come back so soon from, just in case, God forbid, it pops and whatnot, and then Anthony Davis is out, a whole year plus. I think the most pressure is on the other teams in the Western Conference. Like when you look at teams that have always been to the playoffs but can't get over the hump, Utah, like you said, Portland even. The Suns are a win-now team after getting Chris Paul. They're doing really well, and you think, this is their chance. They got Paul, Booker, Ayton going, their big three. I think it's now the time for teams to really, look at it as LeBron's not there. The king at the top is off the throne, so now it's yours for the taking, but you got to go and make the moves to do it. And I think the trade deadline is in 2 days, if I'm not mistaken. So it's going to be curious to see if teams make that win-now move to gear them up for the postseason. The Clippers, they brought in Kawhi and Paul George to win a championship. Now's the time for them to strike while the iron's hot. LeBron's not there. You don't have to worry about LeBron and AD in the postseason. So I think the pressure falls on all these teams because this is your opportunity. Portland, they have a superstar in Damian Lillard. This might be their opportunity to win now. I think Nurkic comes back soon. I think McCollum is back, or he will be back soon. Getting guys healthy and getting ready for this run, because if LeBron is playing, the next 5 seasons, when are you going to have, the next opportunity to do this? It's not where you're in the East where, Brooklyn has their big three, but we don't know how long that's going to last. And, everyone behind them is pretty evenly matched between Miami, Milwaukee, Philly, and so on. So I think it falls onto the Western Conference teams who have been consistent playoff teams over the past couple of seasons, but always end up, having an early exit because they can't, beat LeBron and whatnot.
Well, in terms of who has the most pressure, it's Kawhi Leonard and the Clippers, 100%, especially on Kawhi Leonard. If you take it down memory lane, in 2019, the Raptors won the NBA championship. Kawhi Leonard won Finals MVP. He was that guy to turn around that franchise and bring the first championship ever to Toronto, Canada, and the Toronto Raptors. What franchise you play in the NBA matters. When you look at, again, Kawhi bringing one to Toronto, a team that's never had a championship, that holds way more weight than Kevin Durant winning in Golden State, or even just during the Tim Duncan days. I understand Kawhi was there, but Tim Duncan winning a championship in a great franchise like San Antonio, or when the Celtics win championships. It's different when you do it in a franchise like that. LeBron, a 4-time champion. His one with LA, sure, it was cool. The ones in Miami, sure, he got the burden off his back. But the big one is Cleveland, Ohio. Not only just because he played there, he's from there, because the 52-year drought, because that city never had and never won a title before. In terms of their city, in terms of the past 52 years. They had a 52-year drought. LeBron was the guy to go there and deliver, which he promised and did. Kawhi went to LA to go to the team that plays in the same building as LeBron, where they just got Anthony Davis. And Kawhi said, I'm coming after you. I'm coming for the throne. They told him that he's the best player in the world. He tried to pump out his chest with his commercial, with his crown keychain, to throw a shot at LeBron, in his New Balance commercials. It's Kawhi Town. LA is his city. That was a shot at LeBron. Opening night, Kawhi gave him the business. Christmas Day, he gave him the business again. The Clippers were the favorite all year long to win the title. LeBron and Anthony Davis and the Lakers were waiting on a date in the Western Conference Finals. And Kawhi and his buddy George Paul wet the bed, up 3-1. They had title expectations. The expectations were there, and they were too high, and they couldn't deliver. Now, look at the situation now. Now they should have even more pressure on them to deliver, because there's a more clear path to win. With LeBron and Anthony Davis not in the picture as of yet. I understand how great the Jazz are playing. They don't have championship pedigree in them. They don't have those type of dudes. The Phoenix Suns are having a great year. They don't have championship pedigree in them. The Clippers do. Patrick Beverley has playoff experience. Serge Ibaka has played in the finals. If you're going to ask me, that was a huge upgrade for them. Getting rid of Doc Rivers, a huge upgrade. To Kawhi Leonard, again, a 2-time Finals MVP. George Paul has had plenty of playoff experience. And now, with LeBron and Anthony Davis not there right now. Again, Anthony Davis, we don't know if or when he's going to come back. And if he does, is he going to have minutes restrictions? Is he going to look like Anthony Davis? How is he actually going to come back if he does come back? LeBron, again, when he had one other injury in his career, and that was in year 16, his first year in LA. Dealt with a groin injury. How'd that pan out? He was out 5-6 weeks, and he never returned the same. He was god-awful. That was probably the worst stretch of his career, despite his numbers being decent, probably literally since his second year in the NBA. I thought he was that bad. He looked disinterested. He didn't look like he wanted to be there. He was slow. He lost his quick twitch. He didn't have that explosion. Now he's dealing with a high ankle sprain. How is he going to come back when he comes back? Year 18, age 36. It's not just a guy, it's not him recovering at age 25. It's a different animal right there. So with that being said, there are zero excuses for the Clippers to get it done behind Kawhi Leonard. And back in terms of the franchises, which I wanted to touch on, the Los Angeles Clippers have never played in a Western Conference Finals, let alone making a finals or winning a championship. They play in the same building as the greatest franchise in the history of the NBA, with 17 banners, with countless of Hall of Famers, countless of all-time greats, top 10 greats, top 5 greats. That's the type of pedigree the Los Angeles Lakers has. And he went to the Clippers to change that culture. It's like if Kevin Durant and the Nets win in Brooklyn, a team that's never had that. They would be the ones to change that. Like, a championship with the Clippers would be iconic for him. That would be a legacy moment. Then you could compare him with the all-time greats, a top 20, a top 15 all-time great, with the Finals MVPs, with the great numbers, the Defensive Player of the Year, and the list goes on and on. 3 Finals MVPs with 3 different franchises, which is the ability to do, being the second player in NBA history after LeBron did that next year. So doing it with the Clippers, and now the expectations are there because there's no one really in their way that's more superior than them in the Western Conference. I think there's zero excuse and a ton of pressure on them. Because again, if Kawhi doesn't get this done with the Clippers, Jerry West may got to consider blowing this up, if you're going to ask me. Last thoughts before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the money. Now the Clippers are, they're gonna be perceived as the favorites in the West if they weren't already because of Anthony Davis's injury. Now you don't know when, LeBron's gonna come back, and there's not too much time left in the regular season before the playoffs start. So without a doubt, the Clippers have pressure, but I think they had that pressure regardless. Um, Even before LeBron went out, the Clippers, it was do or die time. It was, finals or bust with or without LeBron. Another team that you could even put into that situation is Brooklyn. They got the big three. They're probably going to win the East. I can't see a team defeating them. But then it was, are they going to be able to beat the Lakers in a possible finals match? And now if there's no LeBron or anything, then you look, can they beat the Clippers? I think so. Can they beat, the Jazz? Obviously. Can they beat, the Suns? Yes, without a doubt. So I think the pressure also falls on them. And, with Kevin Durant coming back, those are, probably three of the top 10, 15, however you want to rank them, players in the league on one team. And the Nets are the favorites, I think, to win it all. And now, their biggest, threat is kind of hurting right now. So if LeBron doesn't come back and play to his best of abilities, like you just said, when he got the groin injury and he came back and he wasn't, LeBron James, then it's who's going to take down the Nets? And I certainly don't have an answer for that if there's no LeBron and AD. So I think the Nets you could even make a case for them to have the most pressure, without a doubt.
For sure. That's going to wrap up today's show. Chuck, always a pleasure talking sports to you. Thanks for joining me today.